Keep in mind that Europe, as I mentioned, is hardly in this whole European Union club, has its own issues, whether Britain wants to be a part of it or not. Remember, Italy right now kicking and screaming with a budget that it says it's not going to change, even though pretty much Germany and France and others have said you got to change it. They're saying they're not. Spain is in no great shape. Portugal in no great shape. You could make the same argument that, Greece is just sort of whistling past the graveyard and could revisit some of the problems it was dealing with 18 months ago. So what happens right now? The argument has been the U.S. would benefit because certainly our dollar, we're a flight to quality and arguably the world's best market and economy, and that we might take advantage of this disarray. Then you got to think about banks and their exposure to this region. So is it really a crapshoot? Let's go to Market Watch's Aaron Gibbs, Dave Maney joining us, and former economic advisor to President Bush 41, Todd Buchholz. Todd, to you, how big a deal is this for us, the United States?
Well, it's fun to watch. Look,
actually, I could think of more riveting things.
Yeah, I guess maybe it's a slow news day.
Yeah, I know the Theresa May thing was.
Carried Theresa May for a long time there. Look, Donald Trump was right when he gave Theresa May a hard time about not having a better negotiating strategy. She's done nothing to create leverage for the UK in these negotiations. He was angry
that it was going so slow.
She should have been on a road tour. She should have been in Canada, in the US, in Australia, in Ethiopia, in Ghana, negotiating free trade agreements and essentially threatening the EU if you do not negotiate with us a fair deal, a strong deal for Brexit, then we will be immediately signing deals with the rest of the world. But instead, Theresa May studied at Oxford. She studied geography. She would have done better to have studied rugby or hooliganism, because in this modern world where you've got leaders like Donald Trump,
player.
Yeah, but presumably he was someone who followed the rules. She needs to learn how to bend the rules and create leverage. Otherwise, she's not going to get anything out of Brexit, and she'll soon be following up on some retirement plan of her own.
Aaron, let's take the worst case scenario for her, that she goes, that she doesn't survive this, that Britain might instead, go down the road, and its history as part of a member of the European Union. But she's gone. There's confusion throughout Europe. This argument that we benefit, do you buy that?
It's going to be a pretty small benefit. We don't have a huge amount of imports and exports between Britain, and even when you just look at U.S. revenues to Europe, we're talking less than 10%, and it's even less than 3% when it gets down to the UK.
So China trade talks to you are going to be more meaningful.
Yeah, there's a much larger percentage of trade, and particularly with corporate profits. And when you look at profit growth, there's really no expected growth within the UK. So it could hurt it a little if they have some real decline in their economy, but it's pretty minimal. It's more about the profit growth that we're expecting and revenue growth we're expecting from China, particularly for US corporations in the stock market, that are a bigger concern to us.
All that's probably well and good and true. I don't doubt a word of it, but I just remember covering the Tide bot crisis and everything else, that out of the blue, wait, we're exposed to that, and banks were exposed to that, and there's always this contagion fear. Very different here, and I grant you. Mm-hmm. Do you worry about that?
Well, yeah, because it just feels destabilizing, right? I think that it's true that the reality is that it's not like giant flows of trade are going to change. It's just that sense, that kind of nagging sense, which of course many people feel in the United States, which is somebody's kicking at the foundations of our system, and this feels like it was kind of.
What are they kicking at the foundation of populism? You could make an argument, right, that the pre-Trump this set the stage. This vote.
Absolutely. I happen to think that it's the same fundamental economic force, which is kind of an atomization of big established things, courtesy of people's access to information through the internet. It makes everything transparent. It makes everybody feel that they're empowered. It makes people able to find people that aren't necessarily living in their same neighborhood or their same country that are like them. It's a very different force that's active on our whole society, and this is a prime illustration. So
I'm making this leap, no one else. It's just an opinion. But Todd, one could read into that. That if that presage, that the original vote in June of 2016, what would later be the phenomena of Donald Trump and other elections we saw to greater or lesser degrees. Is its unwinding happening now, and was it shown even in this country in the midterms? I'm taking that leap. Bash it all you want.
Well, no, I agree with you. Look, this Brexit and Donald Trump's election was about people in both countries, more or less a majority, at least electoral based in the U.S., saying we've had enough of unelected people deciding what we're going to do. The Brits have, for too many decades, felt as if they were beholden to the EU, regulating everything from who could sell insurance to the size and shape of their bananas. And so they didn't feel as if they were being represented, and they wanted their own sovereignty back. And then when you added the immigration debate, that Angela Merkel could decide that thousands and thousands of Syrians and others would be permitted into London and into the UK without any representation by that seemed ridiculous. And a similar thing obviously happened in the US, where many Americans in Democratic states like Wisconsin and Michigan 2 years ago, as well as Republican states, felt as if they did not have a voice anymore in Washington, D.C., and this outsider was going to do it. So this is about taking sovereignty back in one's own hands, and that force, I think, is still in place. And by the way, as we see Theresa May perhaps toppling, looking unstable, unsteady, not mentally, but politically, look who she's dealing with. Mr. Macron in France is unpopular. Giuseppe
29% approval rate.
Right. Giuseppe Conte in Italy, nobody knew where this character come from. And then Angela Merkel herself is going to be gone. So it's not as if...
Yeah, they're hardly all rock stars, right?
They're not rocks either. They're all, shattering pebbles at the moment.
So, Aaron, when you look at your investment landscape, how much of this comes into play, or is it about earnings that have been strong? They're petering down a little bit, and the year-over-year expectations are going to be tested because now we're going to compare with pretty strong quarters going forward. But what do you think?
So this is interesting in that next year, the earnings growth expectations for Europe are actually higher than U.S.
Is that right?
Yeah. Right now, we're expecting about 9.5% profit growth in Europe and 8.3% in the U.S.
It's gone down to 8.3 in the U.S.?
For 2019, it's really gone down quite a bit. It's from 10% to 8.3%.
What brought it down so far?
Third quarter earnings were so good that just on comp basis, you have to
It's hard to repeat.
Yeah, it's hard to, and just as phenomenal years, just making earnings growth even harder to beat. But taking that into account, there is just so much more political risk and instability in Europe that we are still not advising people to overweight Europe, even though we're looking at better profit growth and similar revenue growth, because the U.S. is just on a fundamental basis just more stable, at least for 2019. And so that's where...
Well, that could also be the smallest dwarf in the room, too,
right. So it's just it's interesting that once again expectations are looking to be better, and there looks to be. But when you look at GDP growth, their GDP growth is like half of what the U.S. is expecting. So we just so far. So we're still expecting we would prefer an overweight in the U.S. versus Europe.
Any sector you like in this crazy environment?
Well, I think it's a good thing that the air's been let out of the tech bubble, because that remains
a lot of air.
That is the one thing that we've talked about a couple times, is that it's really not
coming back a little today, but
it's not tech stocks and the rest of the stocks. The whole economy is fundamentally being powered forward, and those earnings growth is being powered by changes people are making in their business model that are being fueled by information technology. And so every sector is the tech sector now.
Yeah, you're right about that. Guys, I want to thank you all very, very much.